Hello, welcome to TMT. In this series, you're going to study a subject which supposedly people have different assumptions and presumptions, but then the idea is to explore the subject in a better way. So let's go ahead. What we are going to do is we're going to learn about economics and see how economics works. So are you guys ready? Buckle up your shoes because it's time to study economics. Now in the first video, we're going to go forward, look at and have an introduction to economics in general. Now significantly, when you intend to consider what economics is, there are many people who think differently. And the reason is because everyone has a different definition. Like for many people, the assumption is that economics is all about money. Sorry, if that was the case, my name would have featured top in the list when it comes to the Fortune 500. Or they think that the subject is too dry. Why? Because we just talk about numbers, growths, and nothing more than that. But then the idea is that these numbers actually help us to understand things. So this is also not the right way to define economics. But then are you trying to say that economics is just materialistic and nothing to do with man, satisfaction, happiness? Sorry, I have to go against the grain. And significantly, an answer which all the students technically give when they have studied economics or when they have not studied economics. It's the most tough subject. Now, in very simple understanding, economics can be briefly described as a social science. Why? Because it tries to study human. Significantly because it intends to answer the questions which are related to economics, like what to produce, how not to produce, how much to produce, and so on and so forth. And significantly, this analysis is done in a systemic pattern where we intend to understand the economic behavior of an individual, of the society, and the economy. Now, that should ring a lot of bells. Technically, because of a fact that in here we intend to understand how an individual behaves, how the society behaves, and also how the economy behaves. So if you look at the historical understanding and then try to look at the subject, there is a lot which we can understand from. Firstly, economics, its etymology comes from the word oikonomia, okio meaning house, nomos meaning laws or customs. So in very simple terms, it should technically mean an idea that you are trying to understand the laws of the household or the management of the household. But then the reference of economics is seen in various works, like the Socratic dialogue, where the idea is about management of agriculture and the resources of the household, or Aristotle's work, where he defines it as oikonomicus. Now, significantly, till 1890, economics as a subject was referred to as political economy because it was largely subjected to the matters of the state. When I say matters of the state, it was about taxation, earnings of the government. Now, it's not that the West was the only one which actually did this. You had even the East trying to go forward and have various theories of economics. Like, for a matter of fact, our very own Chanakya or Kautilya, whose treatise on economics, that is Arthashastra, happens to be one of the most standard texts to understand how to run a state, how to manage resources. Now, significantly, what happens is this. The nature in which the subject grows and the evolution of the subject is actually attributed to this one gentleman called as the Scottish economist, philosopher, thinker, Adam Smith. Because his amazing work, which is called as An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nation, became the solid foundation of defining the discipline of economics very clearly. That's why he's accredited as the father of economics. Now, it's not that Adam Smith just wrote one book. There are multiple works of his. If you want, you can read his work, that is Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is a precursor to whatever Adam Smith had to say, including his book on essays and so on and so forth. Now, the understanding of economics has evolved so much that today economics is used in every sphere of life. And significantly, when you look at economics, it is basically studied in two major formats. One as microeconomics, another as macroeconomics. So if you're intending to understand economics and see economics very clearly, it'll be best to look at the definitions and the evolution of the subject over time. Because as Keynes has rightly said, political economy is said to have strangled itself with definition. Now, a crude joke before we go ahead. It's always told that, economists are those people who basically predict what happened earlier. I mean, yeah, we do predict what happened earlier, but we also try to lay the foundation of what is going to happen in future. Anyways, that doesn't matter now because what matters is this, the definitions. Classical economists like Adam Smith, J.S. Mill, Ricardo have all been accredited to defining economics as a science of wealth. Now, why science of wealth? Because they were more considerate about an idea that wealth is the most important thing, production, consumption should be considered. And therefore, the larger dialogue which we see in economics during this period is associated with wealth. And during this time, we also get a very simple understanding that man is an economic man and women. Let me just make that very clear, because at that point of time, we were not that open to accepting both men and women. Today we can. So let's call it as Homo economicus, or economic man or women, who knows what their goals are, who knows how they would like to go forward and achieve or attain their respective goals with respect to money. That's why they're called as Homo economicus, or economic man or women. Now, this definition doesn't stand true, because you have Alfred Marshall, who criticizes the definition, saying the fact that, no, you can't just think about wealth, economics is far beyond that. And that's where Marshall comes into play, where he talks about economics as a welfarist approach. Now, welfarist approach meaning what? He intends to make you study economics as a study of human behavior. Like, for example, it's not just the materialistic goals, but also with respect to what are the goals of the man at individual level. Now see, this is a very stark contrast to what we studied earlier. But then you have Lionel Robbins. He says that, okay, wealth is one part, welfare is another part. Go beyond it. Actually, economics is something which tries to define itself in the form of scarcity. Meaning, economics is a science of human behavior. That is, understanding the approach, the interaction, the behavioral patterns of the people with respect to the resources which you have, which are limited in nature, and the choices which you make with respect to the same. Like, for example, all of us were there in lockdown. We were not allowed to get out. We were restricted in our portals of our household. Now, the challenge was what to do. Should I watch Big Boss? Should I study? Should I prepare for my exams? Or should I, pick up a hobby and develop it? The challenge is yours. And that is something which Lionel Robbins tries to say. A country has multiple agendas, but it's up to you. How do you want to define that? How do you want to earn that? How do you want to achieve that? And it is this usage which eventually becomes a very broad understanding of economics than we have seen earlier. But then, what happens is the shift comes with, Paul Samuelson. Now, Paul Samuelson happens to be an MIT graduate, and he has a very different approach from what you see with Lionel Robbins. Lionel Robbins having, associated himself with London School of Economics. Now, Samuelson gives a definition which not only encompasses what the older definition was, but adds an aspect of what we call as growth. Why? Because in here, we consider the idea that economics is about how we study people, we study society, the way in which we use and employ resources, the way in which we distribute them, and what is going to happen of it in future. Now, significantly, it is telling like, not just I study the past and the present, but I also study the future. Now, this dynamism gives economics a broader understanding. And that's why what happens is this. When we look at economics and we try to understand economics, we prefer Samuelson's definition because it is encompassing. But significantly, you will find many people going forward and even quoting the Lionel Robbins definition. But anyways, I would like to go forward with one definition, which is the Jacob Weiner's one. Economics is what economists do. Why? Because today we have something called as financial economics, we have behavioral economics. We have literally shifted to every field of science and knowledge. And this vibrancy cannot be compensated. Now, when I say this, when I talk about the vibrancy, it's because of the fact that we look at economics from two broad perspectives. One, what is called as microeconomics. Another, what is called as macroeconomics. Now, I won't make it boring. I'll eventually give you a concise understanding to just look at microeconomics and macroeconomics from a tabulated understanding. Micro, as the term, comes from the Greek terminology meaning micros, meaning small. Macro, on the other hand, comes from the Greek terminology meaning macros. It eventually means sum of individuals or aggregate. Now, the idea of microeconomics is eventually floated through Adam Smith and his contemporaries, but macroeconomics as a study gets developed with John Maynard Keynes. The nature in which you study microeconomics is you look at the behavior of an individual and then try to understand his or her behavior. But when it comes to macroeconomics, you look at the economy as a whole. the understanding of employment is that all the resources are are employed. But in macroeconomics, we do acknowledge that not all the resources are always employed. Going ahead, we also have a very clear understanding that in microeconomics, we look at the operational understanding of issues which are pertaining to the economy in general. But then in macroeconomics, we consider the environment which is inside as well as the outside. So when you study microeconomics, you study terms like demand, supply, production, cost, so on and so forth. But when it comes to macroeconomics, the macroeconomics will have national income, general price level, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, so on and so forth. Now, the reason why you need to know microeconomics is it will be easier to understand how prices are decided. It will be easier to understand how individuals work. But then why you need to study macroeconomics to get a complete picture? I mean, it's something like, I'll just have breakfast and I'll not prefer having the dessert. Now, that's not called a full 3-course meal. If you need to really understand the economy, you need to know the individuals, but also you need to have a complete macroscopic approach. Now, therefore, the approach perspectives are different, wherein in microeconomics, we look at the individual first and then go step by step. But in macroeconomics, we take a hawk-eye view. Okay, we look at the economy first and then pertaining downwards across accordingly. So you can call it a top-down approach. Now, the limitation basically is that if everyone intends to follow the positive or the negatives of following microeconomics and macroeconomics to the fullest, there'll be some issues. Like, for example, look at fallacy of composition. I mean, if everyone in the economy starts to save money, what about investments? I mean, see, it is always considered that, you should save money. We are always told. I mean, ask your grandparents, ask your financial advisors, ask YouTube, because YouTube eventually has that ad which says, are you saving money? Are you investing money? But the challenge and the problem is that if everyone starts to save, who will invest? And therefore comes the problem, what we call as fallacy of composition. But then in microeconomics, it was discussed, debated, and implemented in a time where the modern economics is not there as it is. So therefore, there is a direct, non-correlation to few of the concepts. Something like full employment. Today, I cannot say that all the resources all across the country, all across the economy, around the world are utilized. I don't want to work. I am lying unemployed. There is a country which is not working. Their resources are lying empty. Where will they go? That's a challenge. But anyways, that's something which we will explore. And that's the reason why I said that the subject matter of economics is so vibrant that there are multiple questions. I mean, I started my lecture with a very simple slide. And if you recollect, the slide was something what is called as, in pop culture, Harry Potter. Now, why did we go to Harry Potter? At a point of time, people thought it is not a good commodity to be sold in the market. Today, it's a $1 billion market even after releasing its book. They have movies, they have a world, they have a merchandise, they have animations, they have everything coming in. And I mean, they have a sequel and the prequel to what happened to the events. So isn't it a favorable economic idea? Think for yourself. Anyways, on that note, have fun, take care, do study more, and on a very simple note, gracias.